I'm Kevin Jacobsen of Gold Derby here with Michael Showalter, who has had a very busy TV season, directing three shows, The Dropout, I Love That for You, and The Shrink Next Door. So, Michael, we're going to talk about each of them, but before we get to that, I'm curious, what are the draws for you to be part of a show when certain offers come your way?
The story, the characters, are they characters that I'm interested in? Is it a story that I'm interested in? Um, and can I picture it? Is it a world that I am excited to try to sort of recreate? Um, and so in all of these instances, obviously, um, Shrink Next Door was a podcast, which I really loved the podcast. I was really fascinated by the story and the characters. Was familiar with a lot of the geography of it, the Hamptons and New York and all of that, and so could very easily picture that in my head, and found the relationship between the two main characters really interesting and compelling and mysterious. And then Dropout, I've been obsessed with that story ever since I can remember, including being fascinated by Elizabeth Holmes when she was not yet exposed for having deceived her investors, etc. And then I love that for you is something that I just think Vanessa was someone I was really excited to work with. It seemed like such a funny world and a funny main character, and I knew that, and I was excited to work with her.
So I want to just start by diving into I Love That for You, which is airing now. So that's a show that really is walking a very fine line where Vanessa Bayer's character had cancer as a child and then lies to keep her job at this home shopping network by saying that the cancer is back. How did you find the right tone to strike there, where when you were just establishing that the tone in the beginning?
I mean, very much going off of what Vanessa and Jeremy and Jesse Klein, the showrunners, were thinking, which was to sort of lean into the humor, but then also when there were moments of drama, to let those scenes play too. So I think we're, with that show, just trying to find a balance between how funny it can be and broad at times, but then also trying to let the characters have their moments and get to know them, and to try to see them as full-fledged emotional beings as well.
Mm. Yeah, there's also this very interesting theme where the show is very colorful and bright, and you have that great set at the home shopping network. But it's also a lot of the characters are going through hardship in some
Yeah,
way, and they're not really all that happy,
yeah.
despite what that job sort of requires for them. Can you talk about just finding the sort of emotional core underneath those more comedic
I mean,
elements?
to me, that's what's I find that kind of funny. I mean, I think I generally speaking sort of find humor in sadness, and humor as a way of coping with sadness, or humor as a way of coping with um, heartbreak or tragedy or what have you, that I gravitate towards that point of view where life is often absurd in that it is so heartbreaking and difficult for everybody, that it's sort of like you have to just find a way to make light of it somehow, um against all odds, sort of. So I don't know, that's a tone I really just feel comfortable with, and I feel like I gravitate towards other people that share that point of view, and Vanessa and Jeremy and Jesse certainly are that way too, which is that you use comedy to kind of address the issues that you're dealing with.
Hmm. Right. Well, that there's such an incredible cast there between Vanessa and Molly Shannon and Jennifer Lewis, Matt Rogers. I feel like they all kind of have their own style that kind of
Yeah,
suits them comedically.
totally.
Um,
Yeah, and all those characters are broken in some way.
right.
They all have some sort of the sort of public persona, or the sort of the self that they show the world, and then their true self, which is insecure and vulnerable and lonely, or whatever.
Right. How were you able to kind of adapt though to, each of those different styles that they might have, but still keep the vibe consistent within the cast, if you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly no method to it.
Mhm.
It's really just kind of, I mean, with that show, we were always battling like the schedule, like trying to get as much shot in the day. And so there's part of you that's there's one part of you that's trying to kind of, you know, create a tone with performances, and that's, modulating the performances and giving notes and trying things different ways, and that kind of thing. But then also you're just also running, right, fighting against the clock, trying to get as much in. And so you're sort of, it's always a, a little bit of a, you're juggling those two things. And some of it is just um it just, the tone is the byproduct of everybody's energy. It is, the tone isn't something you control. The tone is something that comes out of just this group of people, um all contributing their, their specific vibe, and then that becomes the tone.
Right. Well, speaking to again tone, moving to the Dropout, I think what I found really interesting there is that it could have been like sort of just like a Wikipedia page basically, and be like, this is the story of Theranos, but
Right.
instead you do get a lot of the plot points, but it's also this really interesting character study of Elizabeth Holmes, and it gives Amanda Seyfried so much room to create this character. What were your discussions with her when you were sort of figuring out what her approach would be to this character in this story?
Yeah, I mean, we just talked a lot about just the character, just who do we think she is? What, just talking through the kind of events of the story, and trying to, and talking to people that knew her or worked with her, and reading the book and watching the thing, and just sort of trying to come up with some of our own ideas about it. Um, we just talked about it without any real result in mind. And that conversation continues until now. Like, she's very enigmatic, Elizabeth Holmes. She's very hard to understand. Her motives aren't always clear. Um, but I think that, I think on some level you have to have empathy for your main character. And even if your character is doing bad things, or is doing the wrong thing, or even turns bad in a sense, I still think you have to empathize, try to find a way to empathize without condoning. And I think we just tried to think of her as in the each individual moment. What might she be feeling in this moment, in this exact moment? Where is she? Rather than to try to paint a big, sort of a giant sketch, like you said, a kind of a a, a broad brush. It was more like, in each individual circumstance, what might she have been thinking here? And I do think she's a very instinctive person, Elizabeth Holmes. So I do think a lot of the situations, she's reacting. She's reacting to situations. She's acting on impulses, and those impulses are, huge ambition and huge, you know, a lot of pride, a lot of a kind of a bravado about her, a desire to make a difference, a desire to make a name for herself, all these things. And also she's a young woman, so she's experiencing, she's falling in love, and she's a sexual being, and she's inexperienced in all sorts of ways. And so all of those ingredients were kind of um being taken into consideration as we were shooting all of the different chapters of the character's life.
Yeah. And you really also are able to contextualize the time and the place of when she was growing up and just what the culture was at that time in the 2000s and then into the 2010s. And you see that in the visuals but also in the song choices.
Yeah.
What was the vision there in terms of really giving us that context for kind of the world around her?
I mean, I think a lot, I mean, for me, it was, you know, the approach with that was cinematically not that different, other than we were trying to tell a story about the character as she becomes more, as sort of her world, she becomes more removed from her sort of child self. Her world becomes more kind of structured and that kind of thing. But a lot of the stuff, the song choices, the specific reference, a lot of that was Liz Merriweather and her writers. I think a lot of that is just what they were envisioning of kind of bringing the audience back to, as you said, the 90s and the early 2000s and what the clothing looked like. And so, I mean, the costume designer and the production designer and every department in the show just doing the research and looking into like what were people listening to, what were people how did people dress. And it is pretty interesting to see how different it feels. You know, I think like the early 2000s doesn't feel that long ago, but it really was. And things were different and things looked really different and the world was really different. And so it's been cool to see people picking up on that and appreciating that about it.
Definitely. And, this is obviously such a fascinating story that has just really gripped so many people. And there's a reason why we have so many projects being adapted about this
Yeah.
story. What do you personally think of her and this story, and that why do you think it is gripping so many people to this day?
I think partially because she was so successful. It's the scale of it is one aspect of it, just that she was on the cover of magazines and she was very much being seen as the next Steve Jobs or the next Bill Gates. It wasn't just another kind of financial scam. She was on track to be one of the great one of the great American inventors, and to take the whole world into the 21st century. And she was very much seen as this larger than life figure. She was pretty, she was dramatic looking, she had this incredibly strange voice, the way she dressed, that her product was going to help people. It all fit a really incredible narrative. And of course, the people that she had surrounded herself with, the Henry Kissingers and the General Mattis and all of these luminaries that were on her board. I think, and the narrative that she was from Stanford and that she would dropped out of college to do this thing. It was a precipitous fall, but I'm sure that, the fact that and I think the fact that her motive is very hard to decipher. It's not as simple as just greed, that she just wanted to make a ton of money. It's hard to understand exactly what it was that she was after. And I think also to imagine what it would have taken for her to continue this ruse or whatever is hard to think about, like that she kept going with like that she was going on Charlie Rose and she was doing interviews with the Wall Street Journal and all this stuff, and this whole time there was no technology throughout all of that, raising the money and doing these photo shoots and all of this stuff. That whole time there was no technology, and so it's strange. It sort of boggles the mind, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. And I
Yeah.
think it's also it's ever evolving. The story keeps going. It's we still aren't sure we fully understand everything.
It is stranger than fiction in many
Yeah.
ways.
Yeah.
And so then with the Shrink Next Door, you have another kind of stranger than fiction story, really, where Paul Rudd is playing this therapist who really is inserting himself into the life of Will Ferrell's character in a way that is very inappropriate. And both of those actors, when I think about them, they're obviously so well versed in comedy and they've worked together before. Can you just describe sort of that set dynamic, especially with the two of them, taking on these more dramatic parts than some people might be used to from them?
Yeah. I mean, we were shooting that right in the heart of the pandemic at the most sort of shut down period. But they're both incredible. I mean, they both took the roles very seriously, and as you said, kind of approached it with a dramatic point of view. And again, just sort of trying to understand the characters, to understand their motivations. And they're both wonderful collaborators, and we just had a lot of conversations about what it was for each character, what each character was getting out of this relationship, why they stuck with it for so long. And I think, if there's any comparisons to be made between all three of the projects, it is this idea of good people doing bad things, in a sense, well-intentioned people who are trying to do the right thing, but whose shortcomings get the best of them, whether it's lying to save your job, as is the case of I Love That for You, or sort of whatever you want to say was happening with Elizabeth Holmes, trying to buy time. Really, she was trying to buy time. She was acting as if, because that's what her predecessors had done, and the kind of clock ran out on her. And then, with Marty and Ike, manipulating a relationship, maybe thinking you're helping somebody, but in actuality, you're hurting that person. Those sort of psychological minefields that I think people seem really prone to falling into are really interesting to me. And just the way in which we are so able to be manipulated and lied to, and how willing we are to believe a lie, and how willing we are to, or how hard it is sometimes to acknowledge the truth, and all these other things are things that are really interesting to me.
Yeah. And just the idea of sort of selling yourself,
Yeah.
in a way that is maybe a little bit fraudulent
Yeah, the
or a lot
narrative,
fraudulent.
yeah,
Yes.
like people create a narrative for themselves, and then they get stuck to the narrative, and and the real self gets lost in there somewhere.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, we don't have a lot of time left, but I did just want to briefly touch on you directed Jessica Chastain last year in The Eyes of Tammy Faye, and she won the Oscar for that performance. The makeup and hair team also won for their work. Just while I have you here, wanted to just maybe see if you could describe a little bit of that journey and what that was like, of seeing that film sort of to completion, and then obviously seeing these artists that you worked with getting that kind of recognition.
I mean, it was the greatest thing ever. And I'm so happy for them, and it was so, like, I felt a level of joy about it that is unique. And I knew when, I always said to Jessica I've always sort of said it to Jessica over the years that we've been working on it, that, her performance was a gift to people that love a good performance, or that love actors and acting. It's a gift because it's like we want actors to, the beauty of a great performance is to see an actor give all of themselves to a role. And I think Jessica really, her performance really epitomizes that. She really gave every single fiber of her being into that character, and you see it and you feel it. And so for myself, just to have been a part of that, to have worked with her, to have contributed in some small way to giving her, helping her have a space where she felt like she could give that performance. Telling that story, working with a big group, of seeing how collaborative that is, you know, whether, you know, hair and makeup, obviously, but you know, the cinematographer, the costumes, the production design, every single element goes into pushing away everything else so that we can create and that we can imagine and have, and just sort of try to be as faithful to these characters as we can. So I was like beyond overjoyed and proud, and love Jessica and love the hair and makeup people, and it was a great day for me. It was a great day for me.
Yeah.
For all of us.
Well, I do want to congratulate you for that and for all of the great work you did this TV season. And for those of you watching, subscribe for more interviews and go to goldderby.com to make your Emmy predictions. Thank you so much, Michael,
Thanks,
for your
Kevin.
time.
Appreciate it.